In the heart of Toronto's Church and Wellesley Village, a friendly gardener named Bruce McArthur was known for his warm smile and colorful flower beds. But beneath that gentle exterior hid a monstrous secret. Detective Karen Collins, a sharp and determined investigator, began to see patterns in the mysterious disappearances of men like Andrew Kinsman, Selim Essen, and Dean Whistle. The community grew restless as more faces appeared on missing posters, and whispers spread of a killer hiding in plain sight. What no one imagined was that behind the blooming gardens and perfect charm lay one of Canada's most chilling predators. Toronto's Church and Wellesley Village was always alive with color and sound. Rainbow flags fluttered from balconies, laughter spilled out of cafes, and people walked freely, finding comfort in a community that accepted them. But beneath this cheerful surface, something sinister had begun to take root. For years, men were vanishing one by one, quietly and without warning. Their faces would appear on missing posters across the neighborhood, but soon those posters faded, the edges curled by rain and sunlight as the city's attention moved elsewhere. Families waited, friends searched, and rumors grew louder with every passing year. The first man to vanish was Skandaraj Navaratnam, a gentle and kind member of the community known for his warmth. He disappeared after leaving a downtown bar one evening in 2010. His friends said he had gotten into a silver van, but beyond that, there were no witnesses, no signs, no evidence. Weeks became months, and his absence turned into another unresolved mystery. Then it happened again. Another man, Majid Kayhan, went missing. Then Soroush Mahmoudi. Then Selim Essen. All gone under strangely similar circumstances. The disappearances spread fear across the village. Some believed there was a serial predator targeting gay men. Others thought the police were not doing enough because of who the victims were. Many were immigrants, people of color, or individuals living on the edges of society. Protests began outside police headquarters, with banners reading, "Missing but not forgotten." Still, answers remained elusive. The city carried on with its daily rhythm, but a quiet dread grew within the village's heart. Among the residents was Bruce McArthur, a friendly man in his 60s who worked as a landscaper. He often tended gardens, trimming hedges and planting flowers in front yards around Toronto's upscale neighborhoods. He was polite, well-liked, and always seemed willing to lend a helping hand. Clients praised his professionalism, and neighbors waved when they saw his truck pull up. His social media page showed pictures of bright gardens, smiling friends, and holiday decorations. Nothing about him seemed out of place. Yet while the city enjoyed its summer festivals and nightlife, McArthur moved in the shadows, unnoticed. He had blended himself perfectly into the background. Harmless, ordinary, invisible. Behind his calm demeanor, a hidden darkness waited. Each time a man disappeared, he returned to his quiet suburban home, keeping secrets buried where no one would think to look. The missing persons cases eventually caught the attention of a few determined officers, but without evidence, they could only speculate. It was as if the men had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, McArthur's business continued to grow, and his clients never questioned why some of his planters seemed unusually heavy, or why he often preferred to work alone. In a city filled with noise and light, evil had found the perfect disguise. Not through violence in the streets, but through quiet, careful calculation. And before long, Toronto would discover just how deep that darkness ran. By 2017, the fear that had gripped Toronto's Church and Wellesley Village had turned into anger. Too many men had disappeared, and too few answers had been given. Families were desperate, and activists demanded the police take the cases seriously. Under growing public pressure, authorities launched a new investigation called Project Prism, focused entirely on the unexplained disappearances of several men connected to the village. What began as a missing persons case was about to uncover a horrifying truth that no one could have imagined. Detective Karen Collins was one of the key members of the task force. She had spent months combing through reports, searching digital records, and re-examining evidence from old files. She noticed something that others had missed: a common link between several of the missing men. Many of them had contact with a man named Bruce McArthur through dating apps or social circles. His name appeared repeatedly, never prominent but always present in the background like a shadow following every victim. At first, Bruce didn't seem suspicious. He had no criminal record, no violent history, and lived a seemingly peaceful life as a landscaper. Detectives even interviewed him briefly, but he appeared calm, polite, and cooperative. He was the kind of man no one would suspect. Still, Karen's instincts told her something wasn't right. His stories seemed too rehearsed, too neat, as if he had prepared for the questions long before they were asked. The turning point came when one of Bruce's clients mentioned something strange. The client explained that Bruce had stored several large planters on her property for months. They were heavy, much heavier than normal, and Bruce always made excuses for why they couldn't be moved. Karen immediately ordered surveillance on Bruce, and what the team discovered next confirmed her worst fears. Officers followed Bruce for weeks, noting his daily routines. He went to work, met friends, shopped at the same grocery stores, and maintained his gardens, an image of normalcy. But one evening, surveillance officers saw him bring a man back to his apartment. Hours passed, and when Bruce returned alone, something in his calm demeanor unsettled them. The next day, that same man was reported missing. The evidence was still thin, but the pattern was undeniable. The task force intensified their efforts, quietly gathering information to build a stronger case before confronting Bruce. During a background search, investigators found old reports from nearly 2 decades earlier, detailing an assault involving Bruce and another man. The victim had survived, and charges were dropped after Bruce agreed to counseling. It was the first real glimpse into the darkness that lurked beneath his quiet surface. Detective Collins knew she was closing in on something monumental, but she also knew how dangerous Bruce could be. A single mistake could allow him to vanish like his victims. Every detail mattered now. Every clue, every hidden connection, every shadow he cast would need to be exposed. What no one realized yet was that Bruce McArthur's garden, the one filled with beautiful flowers and blooming life, was hiding a horror far beyond imagination. The January air in Toronto was biting cold when the police finally decided to act. After months of surveillance and mounting suspicion, Detective Karen Collins and her team were ready to move in on Bruce McArthur. They had been tracking his movements closely, hoping to catch him in the act. What they found on the morning of the arrest would not only confirm their fears, but also reveal one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Canadian history. Officers quietly approached Bruce's apartment building in the Thorncliffe Park neighborhood. The plan was to bring him in for questioning based on new evidence connecting him to the latest disappearance. They had just enough probable cause to make an arrest, but when they entered the building, they made a shocking discovery. Inside the small apartment, Bruce was not alone. Another man was there, restrained and terrified. The officers acted quickly, rescuing the man before anything irreversible could happen. That single moment saved a life and sealed Bruce McArthur's fate. Detective Collins arrived shortly after, her heart pounding as she stepped into the apartment. The sight that greeted her was chilling. The room was meticulously organized, almost unnaturally neat, but the details told a far darker story. There were ropes, restraints, and a camera set up on a tripod. A computer was left open, revealing folders filled with photos of men, some alive, others unmistakably lifeless. It was the kind of evidence investigators rarely encounter, a visual diary of horror. The digital files became the key to unlocking the mystery that had haunted the city for nearly a decade. Each folder contained images of the missing men, organized by name. Some photos showed them smiling, unaware of their fate, while others revealed their final moments. It was clear that Bruce had documented every step of his crimes, methodically preserving his victims as trophies. Police expanded the search to his workplace and clients' homes, focusing on the heavy planters he had stored across Toronto. Those planters, once filled with flowers and soil, were soon found to be hiding human remains. Forensic teams worked carefully through frozen earth, uncovering bone fragments and DNA that linked directly to the missing men. As the list of victims grew, so did the public outrage. News spread rapidly. The friendly landscaper, who had been part of the community for years, was now known as a serial killer. The media dubbed him the killer in the village. Neighbors were in disbelief. They remembered Bruce as polite, smiling, always talking about gardening or the weather. But behind that mask of normalcy was a predator who had operated undetected for years. Detective Collins spent sleepless nights reviewing evidence, piecing together timelines, and identifying remains. Each discovery brought heartbreak, but also answers. The men who had vanished without explanation were finally being found, though not in the way anyone hoped. For Toronto, the truth was unbearable. The city had been home to a serial killer who hid his victims in plain sight, beneath flowers, inside planters, and behind the illusion of an ordinary life. The secret garden of Bruce McArthur was finally unearthed, and with it, the grim reality of what had been growing there all along. The courtroom was filled to capacity. When Bruce McArthur was brought in for the first time, reporters crowded the hallways, cameras flashed, and families of the victims sat quietly, clutching photographs of their loved ones. The man who once seemed like a harmless gardener now stood at the center of one of Canada's darkest criminal cases. The quiet hum of whispers filled the air as the details of his crimes began to unfold. It was hard to imagine that this calm, aging man had been responsible for so much death and suffering. Prosecutors laid out the evidence with precision. They described how Bruce had used his job as a landscaper to hide his victims, burying remains inside large planters he kept at his clients' homes. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. DNA, photographs, and digital records all pointed directly to him. The photographs found on his computer showed a disturbing level of control and ritual, each image documenting the moment his victims' lives were taken. Bruce had treated each murder as though it were an extension of his work, careful, deliberate, and hidden under layers of soil. Detective Karen Collins testified about the investigation, her voice steady but filled with weight. She recounted how the discovery of the restrained man in Bruce's apartment had finally stopped him before he could claim another life. Her testimony described long nights, dead ends, and the frustration of years spent trying to connect the missing persons cases. But when she spoke about finding the remains in the planters, the room fell silent. The horror was too real, too close. Even the most seasoned investigators had been shaken by what they uncovered. Bruce McArthur showed little emotion throughout the trial. He sat still, eyes forward, hands folded, as each piece of evidence was read aloud. Some wondered if he felt remorse, but most believed he did not. He seemed almost detached, as if watching someone else's story unfold. When the prosecutor read the names of the 8 victims, Skandaraj Navaratnam, Majid Kayhan, Soroush Mahmoudi, Dean Lisowick, Selim Esen, Abdul Basir Faizi, Andrew Kinsman, and Kirushna Kanagaratnam, the families could no longer hold back their tears. Each name represented years of pain, years of waiting for answers that came far too late. Public reaction was swift and emotional. Toronto's LGBTQ+ community held vigils across the city, honoring the men who had been lost and demanding accountability. Many criticized the police for failing to act sooner, arguing that the victims had been ignored because of their backgrounds. The tragedy forced a painful national conversation about bias and neglect within law enforcement. In 2019, Bruce McArthur pled guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. The plea spared the families a lengthy trial, but it didn't ease their grief. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. As he was led away, the courtroom remained silent, not out of respect, but disbelief. For many, the verdict was justice. For others, it was a reminder of how long evil had gone unnoticed. Bruce McArthur had lived among them for years, his garden blooming above the graves of those he killed. The trial was over, but the scars it left on Toronto would never fade. Years after Bruce McArthur's conviction, Toronto still carried the weight of his crimes. The church in Wellesley Village, once full of laughter and pride, had changed in subtle but lasting ways. The rainbow flag still waved in the breeze, bars still glowed with neon light, and music still spilled into the streets. But behind every smile was a quiet awareness, a reminder of the men who never came home. The city had moved forward, but it would never truly forget the darkness that had once lived among them. Detective Karen Collins retired soon after the case closed. Her career had been long and distinguished, but the McArthur investigation left a mark she couldn't erase. Even years later, she found herself haunted by the faces of the victims, the photographs, and the planters filled with secrets. Sometimes she visited the murals painted in their memory, standing silently among candles and flowers, thinking about how the truth had finally come to light, and how close it came to staying buried forever. Toronto transformed the tragedy into a lesson. Annual vigils were held for the victims, their names read aloud beneath candlelight as the community came together in grief and unity. The police department, under heavy scrutiny, introduced new policies for handling missing persons cases, particularly those involving marginalized communities. The goal was to ensure that no one's disappearance would ever again be dismissed or forgotten. For many, this reform was the one small piece of hope to come from an otherwise unbearable story. Bruce McArthur spent his days in prison, separated from the world he had once walked freely through. The media no longer spoke his name with the same frequency. His story had become part of Canada's grim history of crime. He lived in silence, an old man behind bars, surrounded by concrete instead of gardens. His flowers, once symbols of life and beauty, were now symbols of death and deceit. The world outside had moved on, but the memory of what he had done never faded. Families of the victims continued to rebuild their lives, though the loss never truly left them. Some found comfort in the belief that justice had been served. Others struggled with the fact that 8 lives were gone while their killer still breathed. For them, closure was an illusion, an end that would never truly feel complete. They turned their pain into activism, pushing for awareness about violence within vulnerable communities and demanding that every life be treated with equal worth. The church and Wellesley Village, resilient as ever, began to heal. The same streets where fear once lived now hosted parades, memorials, and gatherings that celebrated survival and strength. The phrase "killer in the village" became not just a title, but a warning, a reminder that monsters rarely look like monsters at all. Bruce McArthur's case left behind more than just tragedy. It forced an entire city to confront its blind spots, its prejudices, and its silence. It became a story not only about death, but about recognition, of those who had been overlooked, of communities that demanded justice, and of the human tendency to trust what appears harmless. The gardens he once tended bloomed again, this time with flowers planted in memory of the men he took. And as the city grew brighter, the shadows of the past lingered, a constant reminder that evil often hides where no one dares to look. Years after the first disappearance, the streets of Toronto finally breathed again when the truth about Bruce McArthur was exposed. What began as isolated vanishings turned into one of Canada's darkest criminal revelations. The seemingly gentle gardener had lived a double life, hiding his victims beneath the very soil he nurtured. Detective Karen Collins's persistence, along with modern forensic technology, brought justice to those forgotten souls. The community that once trusted its neighbor now stood in disbelief. The killer in the village was finally behind bars, but the scars of his crimes left a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary smiles. If this story kept you on edge, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking true crime documentaries. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next episode of Dark Minds. Tell us in the comments, do you think justice was truly served in the case of Bruce McArthur? Your support helps us uncover more hidden stories behind Canada's most chilling crimes.